Judean wilderness is nothing like the British Isles. It's hot, rugged, and unpopulated. The few species adapted to living there are hardly human-friendly. Some are even deadly. Yet it was to this remote region, hostile to most life forms, that God's Spirit led Jesus to prepare for the demanding project ahead of him. He didn't gather specialist equipment as we might for a trek to some challenging environment, like John the Baptizer living rough in the Jordan Valley. Depending completely on God, even there, would be part of the trial. But as Jesus tried to explore fully what it meant to be human, he faced the greatest isolation and danger, denying himself even a subsistence diet or ready water supply. He was completely on his own at the time, but at some point he must have told others what happened. His hand-picked apprentices were probably the first to hear about his strange experience, although nobody knows how or when they actually did. They would pass it on later to growing numbers of followers in various Christian communities until the story would end up in 3 of the 4 biblical Gospels. The description of this short episode led many to meditate and reflect so deeply on it that it became the foundation for an entire and key season in the Church's year. It's the time when we prepare ourselves to relive the drama of Holy Week and Easter beyond. I wonder what Jesus' friends made of it when he finally told them.
I'm well known for only opening my mouth to change my sandals. That's just what I did when he started saying what would happen to him. Honestly, I thought he must have got it wrong, and he was spooking the others. So I took him aside and I said, "Hey, don't talk like that. I've been called some names in my time, but I don't think Satan was one of them." I were right upset then, although I suppose I sort of got it later. He'd not said much about the time before we joined him. It were never about him. We knew his family all right, his home village, but I suddenly realised I barely knew him at all. He knew I were put out, though. He didn't apologise, neither did I. It were a bit tense. But that evening, he told us a story, round the fire. Usually he'd save 'em up for the crowds, kings and slaves, farmers and builders, sheep and goats, stuff they could relate to. And he'd explain the point after. But, well, this were for my benefit, I reckon. It came over, well, like a fable, case study or summat. God, he said, decided he would send his son, his only son, to earth. Well, like some sort of idiot, I'd already called him that, so it were topical. The son needed to prepare for the toughest of jobs, changing people's minds about respecting God and fully embracing his ways. No one likes dancing to another's tune, do they? So God's motivating spirit put it into the son's mind that the wilderness would suit for this, away from people altogether. It were a harsh landscape, home to the wildest of things: snakes, scorpions, vultures and mountain lions, and the son spent 40 long days and nights completely alone there, scorching or freezing. Naught to eat, hardly enough water even to keep him alive. So the son thought he were delirious the first time that Satan appeared and started with a wheedling words. If you are the Son of God, that were how we began, turn these stones here into bread. His enemy were an expert in the frailty of the human condition. This poor specimen, why, he must be ravenous. It would have been so easy just to make the bread, whip up a round of locust sandwiches, but the Son did not. Nothing daunted then, the enemy returns. The Son is barely conscious. The world's spinning before his eyes, and suddenly he fancies himself right on the very apex of the temple roof. This time, as the Son looked down, the enemy played on his fears. If you are the Son of God, why not jump? And clever as clever, he quotes from Holy Scripture, reminding him how the angels would never let him come to harm. The Son longed to rid himself of the terror of destruction that went with being earthbound, but instead he dredged up a scriptural riposte telling Satan how testing God is forbidden. Round two to the Son. Third time lucky then, thinks Satan, and he whisks his target to a lofty mountaintop. The Son doesn't even know if it's real. But before him lie all the world's mightiest kingdoms. I've got him this time, Satan thinks, smirking. Riches and power never resist. All of this can be yours, he says, if you worship me. The Son contemplates. He knows his enemy is an arch manipulator who knows what drives the children of earth. Let 'em have their fill. Let 'em be invulnerable. Let 'em be top dog, all please themselves, and secretly they'd become his subjects instead of God's. What a coup then, if God's own Son, stupidly condensed into a human life, signs on his dotted line. The Son knows his game. He counters with one last quote. Worship the Lord your God and serve only him. Satan vanishes, and the Son accepts that, even with its dangers, serving God, even above his own wants and needs, is the only way. He leaves the wilderness to begin his work. So Jesus is looking at me in the firelight, trying to see, do I get it? Choosing God's way is the hardest? Is that the moral, the meaning of his fable? I weren't inclined to change my sandals again. I kept stum. Once is more than enough for one day. As Jesus braved the extreme conditions of the Judean wilderness, he was at the mercy of the elements, the difficult terrain, and the predators of the place. He was as vulnerable as he could be, and as God's only Son, possessing extraordinary powers and abilities, he needed to experience that. He would do so again, at the hands of other wild things, human ones. Over all the years, God's beloved species had not quite developed as planned. Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness brought a distant echo of the 40 years of trials which the people of Israel endured following their rescue from Egypt.
But like any of our species, they still had not learned their lessons. They couldn't embrace divine wisdom, nor bear to hear the home truths God-inspired prophets brought them. Lambs though they had been made to be, they preferred wolves' clothing. It was a much more fashionable look. Never mind the pain and misery it brought. They simply could not stick to God's all-pervading way of love, awareness of and reverence for their Creator, respect for one another. Where the wild things were was the best training ground for Jesus after his immersive baptism to discover how that felt. But, visions apart, it seemed the wildest, most dangerous enemies were not external, but stowaways already on board.